Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our TRW conversation between Imelda Almquist and me, Wiebke Hansen, about how the land keeps the score, healing the trauma held in the earth. This really is a conversation between Sweden and Germany. Well, Sweden, you're Dutch, really.
I am, but I am in Sweden.
Okay, I remember that place. So I'm a business alchemista. I have a corporate career, and then when life threw some curveballs at me, personal development, I learned how to go through dark patches and transform the dark moments into gold, into self-awareness, and getting onto my personal path. I would like to actually thank my teachers before we start the actual conversation. I first got introduced to a more spiritual way of walking through the Hindu pantheon, yoga and stuff. And the great teaching of that pantheon was meeting the goddess. I grew up in Protestant Germany, so we have one God, which I imagined to be a man with a white beard when I was a child. And here there was a divine face of a woman. It was magical. It was a great opening, really. A great empowerment to be connected to divinity. And I studied with indigenous cultures of the Americas. So their greatest gift was to understand the earth as a living being, which is what we talk about today. The earth, the trees, the rocks, the animals, power animal, all these notions were new to me, and it's been a great gift and shift in my life. And when I had realized that, or gotten to know that, I was thinking, so what am I indigenous to? Like you look at Indians, you look at South America, you look at the Aborigines in Australia. What am I indigenous to? Well, Europe. We don't have indigenous peoples. Yes, we do. And I don't even need to look very far. I come from Schleswig, which is a small town in northern Germany, close to the Danish border. And right next to Schleswig is a UN heritage site, Hedeby, which is a settlement of the Vikings. Like Schleswig calls itself Viking town, so my name Wiebke comes from that root. So here you go. And when I realized that and thought I need to study Nordic shamanism, I came across your course, and that's how I met Imelda.
That's right. Yeah. And we've known each other for a few years, and we've had experiences together in Sweden. So I'm so glad for having this conversation now, Wiebke. So yeah, about me, I am a forest witch, really. I'll talk about that more later. I'm talking to you from my forest house, and my forest school in Sweden today, meaning I have herds of deer running outside the window. We're permanently on safari here. I'm an international teacher of Seder and Norse traditions, and also of sacred art. So I tend to fly around a lot, teach in different locations. I'm an author of 9 books. That's 4 non-fiction books. One of them is actually about the pre-Christian spirituality of Northern Europe. It's the most recent book. I've written other books as well. Even have a picture book series for children, like based on my life here in the forest. A very playful way of providing shamanic tools for children. And I do loads of other things as well. Yeah, I'm a painter. I'm an artist as well. And I think that's enough about me. Let's get into the conversation.
Yeah, I love your pictures. So this is Truth and Reconciliation Week, and it's happened the past, I think it's the 4th year we're doing this, and this year is all about dialogues. And the topic is decolonizations and areas that require decolonizing. So very often people think about colonizers and the colonized people. And just when I received the invitation to the week, I saw your blog about trauma held in the land. And that is really what we want to talk about today, the trauma held in the land, and how we can, the consequences of it, and what the ways we can to release it, giving a voice to the land. So how can we be true earth keepers and heal the earth and give back to the earth and unravel the narratives of colonization and conflict?
Yeah, and it's a really big topic, and I hope we'll be looking at different aspects of it. But yes, I did write that blog recently about trauma health in the land. And the point I was trying to make in that blog or in that essay, it's quite a long essay, is that we are so anthropocentric, like we define everything in terms of the human perspective and as if there are only human beings on the planet, like history is the history of human beings. And actually, Mother Earth hosts us. She makes our lives possible. She nourishes us. She's in a very real way the mother of all of us, the entire human family. And yet, we pay so little attention. We do a bit in the obvious way, with global warming and the pollution and all of those things. But we don't really look at the fact that, we often speak of human trauma, but that the trauma of what plays out between human beings is held in the land in a very real, very physical, very literal way, keeps the score. So if we want to do healing work, it's not enough to only focus on the human beings. We also need to sort of look at the context and the location, because trauma also affects the trees, the animals, the land itself, the rivers, the water, and all of those things. And often the land can still hold that trauma in lots of different ways long after, say, an armed conflict has passed or a big accident site, has been cleaned up. The trauma in the land remains, and that has its impact on the people who still live there. So yeah, that's one of the pieces I wanted to bring to the conversation today.
Yeah. If you've ever been to one of like the concentration camps in Germany, it's a very particular, you may have noticed a particular atmosphere, and it's really, the land is still screaming of the fear and the death of the people that lived there, that had to stay there. And maybe it's not by chance that these places now are memorials and nothing was built on them, because you can't. Yeah. I think that there's something also you shared in your blog of a landscape in like northern Netherlands.
Yeah, that was less traumatic than a concentration camp, and I don't know what the cause of it was. And I think I wrote it in my book as well about the Low Countries. But apparently there is a street, or there's like in the land there is a rift. There is some sort of division, and there also happens to be just a modern street built there, with modern houses where families live. So to the eye, it looks like an ordinary, area where families live in new built houses. But in the land, there's still a rift from something that happened historically. And it's just been researched in that area because at some point it became noticed that you have perfectly nice family homes on this street, yet every family on that street divorces. All the couples who move in, they divorce, they move on, like no one stays. And that's like a higher than statistical chance. In most places in the Netherlands, families live in those houses like for many, many years and happily coexisting with their neighbors. So some research was done on that, and it was discovered that the land still holds a rift. It still holds a wound, a rupture, a division. And the land is seeking healing. So it's communicating that through the behavior of the human being. So it's really the land saying, please heal me, because before you're going to be living here, because while I'm still so traumatized and ruptured, you cannot lead a happy life here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, something similar actually happened when well, not in that scale of land, but a memory I think held in the land. I was married to an Italian. I lived in Italy, and we split up, got divorced. And I was a single mom with 2 daughters. And I felt quite good about myself. Well, good about myself. A divorce is never nice, but it was an affirmation of my values, really, to say I'm not staying in this relationship, and I'm not giving this kind of example to my daughters. And I have the financial power to walk my own path. Mm-hmm. Now, for other happenings, I returned to Germany. And suddenly, there's everywhere you see this, the poor single mom, the poor single woman. It's like really, it was heavy. It's like very disempowering when I didn't really feel like that. And going to a healer, he once said to me, oh, you look like a Trümmerfrau. The women after the war, well, they were single often because their man was still at war, or even they had died in war, and they had to carry forward their life and their children and make a living. And I believe it was heavy at the time, and they made it. And this they made it is nowhere there. It's only the heaviness of the Trümmerfrau. And it's talking about shamanic tools. I journeyed and I asked, what is this about? And because in my lineage there was no Trümmerfrau. My mom was a child during the war, yes, and my grandma was alone for a while. She reopened the shop. So there are no really Trümmerfrauen in my family, and still there is this for me, and even for the entire country, this myth of the poor single woman. And I journeyed, and actually I met this Trümmerfrau spirit, so to speak, and I transferred it into a rock so that I wouldn't carry it in my energy signature. And where did it want to be placed? On our graveyard, a monument for fallen soldiers. I mean, perfection, really. So yes, it's held in the land, and you live it, and you can heal it.
Yeah. And if only more people were aware of that and lived with that, well, also you have to have some skills, but the willingness to actually do deep listening, also to non-human voices and tuned in. And often you find out there's like a little task you're asked to perform, and then when you do that, something drops into greater balance, or a higher degree of peace returns to land. It can be very beautiful, very rewarding work.
I remember when we talked, you spoke about, it's like in conflicts or in decolonizing, we talk about the peoples, colonizers, decolonize. We never talk about the land. Land doesn't have a voice, really.
No, that's true. And when we talked earlier to prepare for this talk, I started talking because I remember this story that played out in New Zealand, where in 2017, I looked it up, the parliament in New Zealand passed a historic bill, and the Wanganui River was granted personhood, meaning that the river was now, by law, going to be seen as a person and acquire the rights of a person. And that was done for the reasons of the river's long-term protection and restoration. But it also means that when decisions are made about land that surround that river, the river has to be consulted. So a human being, which I hope is a shaman of some kind, has been appointed to be like the voice of the river and to speak for the interests of the river. So decisions cannot just be made the way we like habitually do. We make decisions about talking to the ocean or asking how the river feels about a dam being built, or whatever it might be. And I just think that this is a luminous example of where we need to go in the future. We need to, and it needs to be done legally as well. So, we can actually reinforce it. But forests and rivers and mountains, they need to be given personhood, and they need to be given a voice. And we need to train up people or hire people who have a very good ability and experience of speaking, of becoming the voice of those beings that are all around us and share the world with us and make our existence possible, but which do not have a human voice.
Yeah. It's a recognition of balance, really, of living in balance with your environment, right? And not just taking as we're doing now.
Yeah, there needs to be reciprocity there. And I also think there needs to be a healing of the overtaking that has already occurred. And that would also, that's a different dialogue, would take me into the whole realm of the history that human beings have different animal species that just use them for our own purposes. And I see very little immense work being done. I know it falls outside what we're talking about, but, to my mind, there isn't only the resolving of conflict between humans and humans. We also need to really, if we want to live in a different way, look at our relationships with the non-human realms, the animal kingdom, the land, the waters on our planet, all of those things as well.
The animals. I remember that we have this like window, and a bird flew against it, a little robin, and I held the robin in my hand just until it was kind of got itself back together and looking into the eye of the robin. That was somebody home. That was a being. That was a personality looking back at me. It was amazing. And that was a robin. Now think of the chicken in factories. I mean, there are loads of documentaries that point out the horrific, well, that it is a form of colonization, isn't it? The horrific living conditions. It's like a concentration camp, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that kind of that style of factory farming, but it's also, well, that is then the animal realm, but this whole phenomenon where we dehumanize other people, where we think of other people as less, or we think of other people as resources, where we take their land or their labor or their energy or whatever their resource or their culture or their spiritual practices, and we just like take it. We just take it for ourselves. And the other people and other cultures in the world are not just to use a Swedish word, a smörgåsbord. They're not just a sandwich buffet from which we take. So decolonization then also means like looking at how that has been done historically. So like making amends for that, acknowledging that work to some extent is being done. But we also, to do that, need to colonize our own minds. Like all of us together need to really do shadow work and question our own ways of thinking.
Mm. Yeah, you were, like, when we were talking, you were also talking about we were talking about water and how water holds memories, and you said that it was like not interfering, but present during your teachings. Like during COVID, we had all this online, like we're doing now online, right? Yes. And you could feel the presence of water in your teachings, right?
Yes, no, I can talk about that a bit, but yes, I think as most of us know, I think what's so interesting to me is that the proportion of water and land on our planet is exactly the same as the proportion in an average human body. I mean, that can be individual experience depending on height and body mass and whatever, but essentially it's around 70%. And I find that extraordinary that Mother Earth has the same proportion of like mass and water as a human being does. And yes, water is like a memory keeper. Then, of course, in our day, we live in a time of rising temperatures and global warming. That means that you have the ice cap in Greenland is melting. I'm teaching in Greenland in September. I spend time there and I teach there. So I'll be there again in 2 months' time. And you see it happening there. I can see in the years I've been to Greenland that there is less ice now. It's actually really visible. And it's quite confronting to see. It's quite hard to see that in Greenland. But there's also the awareness more from a shamanic point of view that water is the memory keeper, and the room for water, that's also where I file away memories or find ancestral memories. So that is water. So when ice melts and the water levels are rising, and all of what has been held in ice now is flowing again in water, from my point of view, means that a lot of ancestral memories or ancestral memory or memories from the past and information are going to be available to us. So rather than only looking at the panic of, we have a rising sea level, which we've really had since the previous ice age, the land has been rising for many centuries. We also need to look at what is the gift in this? What are the memories or the teachings or the ancestral knowledge held in that water? So look at that dimension as well. But then on a practical level, during COVID, as you said, all we teachers had to teach online. We're not allowed to teach in person for obvious reasons. And in my classes, mostly I have an equal mix of people from all over Europe, and then I have people in the US and Canada, and occasionally I have like Australia and people from other continents as well, Peru or whatever. But largely it is Europe, and then it's the US and Canada. And I've done these classes where we're doing shamanic work. And at some point, I just noticed that what people were sharing took on a very oceanic quality. It became very watery. You could almost hear the waves rolling in. And so the people were talking from a very deep place. And I thought, my goodness, we're working between two continents. And now I'm actually hearing the voice of the Atlantic Ocean. the Atlantic Ocean, that is an enormous body of water between us, is making its presence felt in the classroom. And isn't that extraordinary? And then once you realize it, you can work with that. You can say, well, hey, hello, this is going on. So welcome to the spirit of the Atlantic Ocean. We can give you a voice. What would you like to say here in this virtual classroom? And that's a beautiful thing to do that.
So which ocean is between us? It's the Baltic Sea, right?
But yeah, we're across the Baltic Sea. Yeah. I don't know, it's a sea. I think ocean is larger. It's not the Baltic Ocean. I think it's the Baltic Sea. Ocean is like
yeah.
It's the sea, but yes, we are talking across. Like I am about, I think, 10 hours, by car, 10 hours north of you. So you are more at the southern end of the Baltic Sea, and I'm much further up, more in the middle. But yeah, there's a body of water between us. Yeah.
I like to think of her as her. For me, it's a feminine spirit, and it's like Regina Baltica, so the Baltic Queen in a way. I don't know, that just dropped in some years ago. Regina Baltica.
Yeah, I think that's cool. It's very cool. Yeah. Yeah, and if I may, one more point here, because we're not talking about water in the ocean, but I've worked with geomancers in the past, and then learned to do geomantic work. That's kind of like shamanic work where the focus is on the land.
The land, yeah.
So like shamanic practitioners focus on human beings, and geomancers focus on land. And one thing, I learned many things, but one thing I learned is that just like we human beings have feelings about other human beings, like we sometimes like observe that maybe our neighbors are happier or healthier or better off, or we feel sorry for people who are struggling. But it was a revelation to me that land also has a connection to other land masses, and it actually has feelings about that. So, the example I was given at the time that we were doing this very close to Gibraltar, we were in Spain, like we're working in caves that have rock art in them. So that was like the body of water near the Mediterranean Sea. So I was told that, for instance, like Africa has feelings about Europe. And then you also get back to the whole colonization thing again. Africa has feelings about the way that Europeans came and colonized a lot of countries in Africa. Africa has feelings about, the complete difference in wealth. You have these very wealthy Western countries, good healthcare and education systems to the north. And in Africa, there's some very serious trouble going on. We hear a lot about Palestine. We hardly hear about Sudan. There are dreadful things going on in Sudan. So we have this, in a way, a far more troubled continent where, there is a lot of poverty. And then, of course, as we all know, we've seen the harrowing images. We've got the boat, talking about water again, it's the Mediterranean. We have the boat refugees, like lots of people out of desperation to create a better life for themselves and their children. They board these very rickety boats, not all of them make it. And these boats then go across the Mediterranean and are often not wanted or not welcome at the other end. So again, on the human level, we see that on the news and we hear these terrible stories, and I think we're all aware of that. But putting it back, and I'm fully acknowledging the horror of that, but putting it back to land and water for a moment, Africa would have feelings about so many people who are like indigenous to that continent, whose continent it is, just wanting to be out of there, wanting to be gone and going to Europe. What feelings does the Mediterranean have about all the people who are like dying in that water, making unsafe crossings? And I'm just speaking for a moment for that. sorry. That those. Sorry, I need to drink some water now. That that's another sea and another huge landmass. Africa is a continent. Europe is a continent as well. But these enormous landmasses, like human beings have relationships and conflicts and tensions. That happens between landmasses as well. And also then if you think of water being the memory keeper, I just talked about Greenland, all that memory is held in ice melting as the ice back and the glaciers melt. But also just think of the Mediterranean Sea being a memory keeper, and all the people dying there at the moment. What sort of archive of human memories is that storing up? And what energetic field is that creating for people crossing the Mediterranean Sea or going on holidays, trying to have a beach holiday there? mean, these are huge questions.
It's a contradiction in itself. And what you said about it's like a huge graveyard, and what does it do to the water? Think about it. 50 years back or more, 75 years back, we had something similar happen with people from Poland and all these Baltic regions crossing the Baltic Sea to safety to Denmark and Sweden, and a lot of people dying. And actually talking about a healing opportunity. When this happened with the Syrian refugees, I spoke to an old woman here, like in her late 80s, a refugee. And she said, when I couldn't really watch it because when I saw them going on the boats, I was reminded of my own flight across the Baltic, and I left everything at home. And there was no alternative. If you went back, it was sure death. And if you stepped on the boat, you didn't know, and you were aware you didn't know.
Yeah.
So in a way, this repeat of story, it was an opportunity for healing. She shared it, and something happened in the sharing, just a minuscule healing, but it helped. And a similar thing happened with the war in Ukraine, actually. Looking at all the people sitting in metropolitan, the tunnels, it is looking at it, I could feel my mother being very affected to see people sitting in a cellar, because that's what she did. So with these happenings today, memories are evoked in our older people, and there's an opportunity for healing if we know it, if we look for it, and if we have the tools for it.
Yeah. And of course, there's other issues that come into play, because I mean, there's so many things, like there's a lot of ageism at the moment, that older people are seen as like inferior citizens. They're past their sell-by date. You don't need them. They're actually are rightful elders. They are wisdom keepers, and we do very, very well. So they're great teachers because they've learned through things that modern generations have not. Like my parents were children during the war. My mother grew up in a house where, because my mother and grandfather decided to shelter a Jew, so they had a secret cupboard on top of the kitchen cupboard, the secret space where they were hiding someone. And at some point that was discovered, and my grandfather was led away to be executed. Then they decided not to do executions that day, and he came home again. And my mother, the child in the family, and her mother had already, accepted that he was going to die. And he actually survived. He came home again. For some reason, they canceled the executions. But just to sort of say, as a little vignette of, we just say, oh, life is so difficult at the moment. But if I think what my known ancestors, I met not my grandfather, he died before I was born, but my grandmother and my mother, I met them, I knew them really well. And, other things happened as well, that, my grandmother was going to adopt like a little baby boy to hide it for, it was a Jewish family being deported, and she was going to adopt the baby, and that was going to become my mother's little brother, and to sort of cover up the fact that it was a Jewish baby. And that was discovered. So on the day my mother was told the little brother was going to arrive, the crib remained empty, and the baby never arrived because it was discovered, the plot was discovered, and the baby was taken to a concentration camp. And how dare we be ageist? How dare we not see, people older than us who have lived through these scenarios and also have learned from those scenarios. They have the life experience, they have some knowledge about navigating these things. And, how dare we be ageist and speak of them as if they have no value to society? I think that's also an area where we need to decolonize our own minds. Yes. And also, I think we need to bring those people in, and also we need to really engage with those stories, because we also know that whatever lesson we do not learn, history is going to repeat itself. Yes. Is that what we want for ourselves?
Exactly. Which is what is happening now, repeating of history, because we didn't learn yet.
No. And that also grieves me, where I think these people suffered unimaginable things, so human beings would learn that lesson. And also we deny their reality and what they went through. If we cannot mind the cold from that and honor them through saying we will ensure that this doesn't happen again, So that was another blog I wrote recently, and got a lot of got a lot of reactions. But I just felt I had to say this. You know,
Yes,
being an
yes.
earth keeper means speaking unpopular truth some of the time. So I make myself a bit unpopular here and there. Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with you. Really, it's not it needs to be said. And talking about ageism, it's also. I actually think we are in a completely different moment of personal power at our age.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by diminishing it, we lose a lot of the wisdom and the power of evolution in the species, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's also this sort of thing we often say,
And
oh, I feel so powerless, but like we are so powerful, but we haven't tapped into all the power we have. We're far more powerful than we think.
and really it's not about somebody else. It's about me, and it's about you, and it's about every single person of those that will listen to us, to step into that kind of personal power and do what you can in your environment and focus on what you can do. You know, like when we are talking again about land and pollution and a voice to the water. There was a pollution here in my city, and it so upset me. And I kept talking on Facebook. But that is virtual. It's like, what can I do? What can I personally do to avoid this happening again? So I started to talk to the various nature groups, and I ended up in the Green Party. And I started to talk in the Green Party, and the election was up, and I ran for political office. So it's if you start to, and I didn't focus on what somebody was doing in Berlin or in Washington or in London. I just focus on what I can do and the place that I live.
Yeah.
And suddenly more and more things open up, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe that's also a message from this call. Decolonization is not outside of us, it's within us. And what can I do personally to decolonize my own thoughts? You know?
Well, this is it. Like, you know, am I actively decolonizing my own mind? And like that is an ongoing project. You don't just sit down for an afternoon and do that. I mean, I don't think like ancestral healing work, shadow work, decolonizing your own mind. It should be an ongoing thing that one is always engaged in. And like every day, it should just be, you know, like it should always be happening like under your breath.
It's tiring. I tell you, it's tiring.
Oh, it's tiring. It's like, give me a break. But
and another one.
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Just on this topic of looking at yourself, I'm now jumping a little bit. Some years ago, I went so talking about women and talking about empowerment, disempowerment. Let's talk about the witches. You know, we're all so proud to be
talk about witches. Yes.
Forest witch. I went on a tour through Germany with a guy, a shamanic practitioner, and we specifically went to places of where there had been witch burnings, like Bamberg has a huge history of witch burnings. And we performed ceremony there, and we went to the Brocken, which is it's like a mountain in the middle of Germany. If you look at the map, it looks like the heart of Germany. It's really in the center, and there's this local story of the witches dancing on the Brocken at May Eve, so at Beltane really. And we sat there and we did our ceremony. We smoked a pipe really close to there's a rock formation called the Witches' Dance Ground, and there's a rock formation called the Devil's Pulpit. And you're not supposed to go there, but we went there and we sat there and smoked our pipe. And going into like meditation, it was as if, yes, they were there, they celebrated, but they were not witches in the sense they were earth keepers. They were the earth keepers of all those who understood the power of the earth. And it was the power, that power was kind of broken during the witch hunts. And actually I listened to an indigenous woman talking about that. So somebody from the US who had an insight during one of her sweat lodges that during the times of the witch hunts, not only was something done to the witches, but to the female one. There are male witches as well, but mainly feminine. The women usually today identify with being a witch. But it was also for the men, because in the indigenous view of the masculine and the feminine, the masculine, one of the aspects of the masculine is that of protection and nurture, no, that of protection of the feminine. And in the witch hunts, the men couldn't protect their women. They couldn't protect the children, their daughters or their wives or their mothers. They were helplessly looking at the destruction and at this earth power destruction. And that did something to the tissue of the masculine as it did something to the tissue of the feminine. And with that, we got out of balance, really. And it's really that kind of balance that we need to heal.
Yeah, and I was like so struck by that, because I really loved, and we did our preparation, talking about like land, and then the issue of like tissue.
Yeah.
And I actually went online and I Googled it on a medical level, contemporary medical level, like if you have like deep tissue issues or injuries, like, what's the prescription for healing? And it was rest, pain management, physio or therapy, proper nutrition, hydration, and to avoid toxins. And I thought, that's a pretty good recipe for our world right now, isn't it?
How do you rest? So how does the world rest? Well, COVID.
Well, yeah, that was time on ice. That was like enforced rest, but also, did we use that time correctly? And I think to some extent, yes, I think people have written amazing books and amazing projects have come of it. But also for many people, it was just like waiting for the world to go back to normal. That was the whole point being that it can only be a new normal. You can never go back to the world before COVID. So it was like rolling with the whole new normal. But also going back to the witches for a moment, also let me say, as I said, I'm talking to you here from my forest house and forest home, where I teach my Seder courses. And I call myself a forest witch in public. And people are often a bit like, why do you do that? Why, I know you as like a teacher or an author and you're like a painter. It's like, why don't you call yourself, one of those things? Like, isn't that a bit
something nicer?
A bit like, and I say, well, no, actually, it's a very conscious choice, because I want to call myself something that reflects my ancestry and where I'm rooted. And I was raised in the Netherlands. I am Dutch, but I'm married to a Swede, and I spent most of my time in Sweden. That's the place I consider home. So I travel all over the world for work. And I feel when I call myself a forest witch, you were just talking about the witches being burned and the incredible loss of power, and there was nothing they could do to defend themselves. Because I was just listening yesterday evening to medieval historian talking about the witch trials and how they were tortured, like how those scripts were followed, and it kind of like there was no way out of it. You were either killed because you confessed, or you were killed because you didn't agree to confess. But like there was no way out. It was horrible. So we are so lucky, Wiebke, you and me and other women in Western culture, that we have that freedom now. I can call myself a witch, get some funny glances, but I'm not punished for it. And when I call myself a witch, I also claim myself in the heritage of these women who were earth keepers and healers and died. They died for the fact of bringing their talents to the world. And like they died really brutal deaths. So by calling myself a forest witch, I place myself firmly in that ancestry. And every time I call myself a forest witch, I heal through that word. The people who came before me, the people who were my ancestors, who were witches, and I weave them into my life. And I acknowledge my debt to them. And also here, the forest is my greatest teacher of the wild animals as well. Actually, a year ago, we had like three juvenile bears in the forest. One of my students went into the forest on her lunch break, and she came back saying, wow, there are like these 3 bears. And I thought, oh, this woman has had a really amazing shiny journey, because normally they're not in the area. And then I heard stories from the neighbors of bears scat at the lake, and other people had seen them and there had been sightings. And I thought, no, there were actually 3 bears right behind my house. And one of my students met them when she went into the forest. So, you know, you have all these sort of, you know, all the, we have the wild boar, we have the deer, there are like lynxes. It's really, really wild, in a really wild place. And, you know, all of these beings, like it's animism again, but they are my non-human teachers and they are my greatest teachers. So when I call myself a forest witch, I also think my location, and I also want to credit like all of these non-human beings who are my teachers, who send me dreams, who teach me lessons, who give me skulls and bones. And you know, so that's the reason I call myself a forest witch. It's a very deliberate choice, and I'm not being funny or I'm not being
Yes,
silly.
I totally understand it. And what I really appreciate and what you just shared is this, when you say they are my teachers, now somebody who's not as deeply into personal work might wonder, how can a beer teach you? I think it's a lot about self-awareness and about going about with open eyes and realizing what's happening to you. So if the beer shows up, what does he want to tell you, right? And your
Yeah,
fear, maybe
exactly.
you go into fear and then you need to manage your fear. And I think this openness to being taught has to do with kind of personal humility. So
Mm-hmm.
in a good sense. And picking up on the humility part now, and the witches. So talking about I returned to my home country here of Schleswig, my hometown of Schleswig, and there was this story about witches in this place. And yeah, I identified with one of the witches, and maybe that was a past life. And I went on a journey, and lo and behold, I was not only one of the witches. There has been a lifetime when I was one of the perpetrators. So,
Yeah.
you know, if that is your worldview, that you don't only have this life, but there are many lives, and each life teaches you something, you were not only a victim, you were also perpetrators. So kind of get out of that victim mode and into a different kind, like stepping back. Even those who are your perpetrators in this life, maybe you've done a dance of perpetrator victim over many lifetimes, and then it is really about stepping back and saying, so what is my lesson now? Why is this happening again? And maybe, and here we come back to colonization, what does it need to heal that? So we can stop this dance of victim and perpetrator, of colonizer and colonized. What if one of the slaves was also a slave owner? What does that do to you? That kind of awareness and recognition.
No, I agree with you completely. I think that's hugely important work. And then, you know, things happen in my life. I always have the working assumption that, you know, even if, you know, in my perception, I'm the one negatively affected now, I assume I'm learning that lesson or receiving that mirror because I have been on the other side as well. And, you know, I can see that in a very real way that people need to, it seems wired into the human condition that we need to experience all things from both sides. And, you know, perpetrator victim is one of those things, but there are like many others as well. And I also just find that for me, at least, it's a personal statement. I cannot describe it for other people. It helps me to make more peace. If I think, well, okay, that was a really tough thing that happened there and it doesn't feel fair. Because that was can run away with you. That, oh, it's not fair. It's not fair. And like, oh, I'm a victim. But, you know, and some people really are victims of terrible things in our world. And we've named some of them in this conversation. But there is also a point in my life where I think, okay, I now take a step back. Say, okay, I was at the receiving end of this. But now take a moment and do shamanic work and ask to be shown when or where or how I was at the
What's right about this I'm not seeing.
But I was at the end of it where I was imposing or inflicting this on another person. And then we can also like step into that and own that. Some of the sting goes out with it. And you say, I've now been at both ends of this axis. The lessons to be learned at both ends. And only when you have been on both sides can you sort of kind of like close it and say, okay, I don't know what those teachings are. I can now go to a place of unity with it, which is also a place of not blaming other people. Understanding of, you know, people get so involved in these things because that's the lesson served up for them. That's the lesson that they're learning at the moment, and to have respect for that and not be this do-goody person thinking that I can save the world or make the world a better place overnight. but still like make my personal contribution and do that ongoing shadow work, the decolonization of my own mind the whole time, every day again, even on the weekends.
Thank you so much. I think that's indeed. So from decolonizing people, we went to the land and to the water and to the history, and we're back at a like personal level. What is our?
I would like you to say, when we talked earlier this week, you said something about Viking warriors being prepared to die. So I think it's and that's part of the material I teach, obviously, but I think that's a really important point, because you said something there about being prepared to die and not being ready for death. Would you mind just adding that?
Yeah, of course. And that, of course, that takes us back to this, when I went around Germany for the witches, it was also, we also went to burial sites of like First and Second World War, actually, in Belgium. Huge field. Imagine a huge field full of crosses, like one next to each other, and you have 6 names on one side and 6 on the other. So the amount of souls, of bodies in that field was huge. And we sat and went into ceremony, and what I perceived was all these young men who were so bewildered, and so they didn't know where they were shouting for mom, really, and mom from the sky kind of saying, hey, I'm here. And it was guiding them out back into the heaven. And yes, these young men were unprepared to die. And in our culture, death is really not a topic. And the reminder, well, like you were saying, is like in Viking culture, they strongly believe that death was, I think, predestined. So you go to war fully prepared to die if it's your time to die. And if it's not your time to die, you will come back. So they were like in a great acceptance of what life was placing in front of them. Yeah, and our young men were not. And I think even today we're not.
And I think there was also a difference that these Viking warriors believed that if you died, dying a warrior's death was the most honorable death of all, and it granted you a ticket to Valhalla. You got to be with Odin and be one of his Einherjar,
right.
Sort of warriors who will ride out when Ragnarok starts. So, and of course, I'm a mother of 3 sons. They're currently 24, 22, and 20. And in the UK, there is now talk about, what do you call it, military service, or, where you sort of, men are going to be, conscription, I think it's called, and men are going to be enlisted and have to sort of do military service. Like
talk in Germany as well.
Yeah, so, well, it's not strange in terms of what's like happening around us, but it kind of fills my mother's heart with fear, because I remember all my mother's stories about talked about sheltering a Jew, my grandfather nearly being executed, but also that in the small village where my mother lived, there were many of these farmers' families, large families then, and some families had like 4 sons who all went to war and none came back. So I feel an ancestral panic at the notion that there's going to be conscription, and that my sons would live through what these young men in World War II and World War I lived through. I will admit that. And, working as a teacher and practitioner with death as a sacred being, and working with death as an ally, still does not mean I've made my peace with the notion of that happening to my sons. That's still a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, that's the theory that you read in books about life being predestined. The Nordic warriors thought about it, but your own sons, it's a completely different story, isn't it?
This is just me talking as a mother here, and also as a teacher of death and dying and Viking age knowledge. Yeah. So we live. It's a Chinese curse to say, "May you live in interesting times," and I think we truly do live in interesting times.
We do. Yes, we do. We do. Yeah. Wonderful.
And did you want to talk some more just about, we've covered a lot of ground here, but talk about, people may say, okay, that's all very well, but what are the practical solutions? What can we practically do? I think that may still be too abstract for most people listening to this. Did you want to just go through that?
If you summarize what we talked about, is the self-awareness, like work on yourself and stepping out of victim mode. And so therapy, we are both shamanic practitioners, so That's a completely different view of the world and of your accountability in it, and of healing. There are levels of healing. I think traditional Western talking therapy has its point for the mind. It clears a level, and then you might get stuck. And there are just so many different tools and methods available. Your body, you need to do body work. There are things that are held in the tissues that your mind can't get to, but your body will. Breathing, breath therapy. So there's so many modalities, and it's really, for me, it's a lot about your personal. That's responsibility also for decolonizing yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where it will start, because if people do not do that, the rest cannot proceed. I think, looking into animism, or sort of entertaining an animistic worldview, where you do open yourself, you do deep listening to every voice, from every flower and every bird, to the wind and the mountains and the rivers. I personally think that once people have done some decolonization of their own mind, and they're adding to the movement of decolonization in their own culture or tribe or society, you can do ancestral healing work, you can do shamanic healing work, but there's also such a thing as doing like healing work between entire nations. I don't think the world is ready for that yet, but I want to put it out there. Just can do ancestral healing work and look at what happens between different like families or sides of the family. It's perfectly possible to do that work on a larger level, and there are people like out there who have the skill to do that. The world has just not woken up to the fact that that exists. But I very much want to put it out there as something that I hope that is in the future. You have already mentioned ceremony as well.
And constellation work, really. I think that was one thing you were also pointing to. The family lineage in constellation work. Family constellation works for people, for single people, for your family, and you can put entities like nations there as well. And there are people doing that.
And there are people doing that, but indeed, like what I was saying, how does Africa feel about Europe? How does Europe feel about Africa? Or how does the Mediterranean Sea, communicate with the Atlantic Ocean or the Baltic Sea, and meeting the North Sea? You can do constellations, meaning that you create a setup where you allocate those things to physical space. It could be done even like a little pebble or a map or a drawing or something. And then you put a person there who has the gift, a neutral person who has that gift of tuning in. So you put people in those different locations, and then you have them speak for what is held in that field. And you really get astounding insights when you do that. So it's a very good way of mapping what is going on. And once you have mapped it, you can also, using shamanic techniques, healing techniques, you can start healing what is going on. So also just ending on a message of hope. Things do not need to remain as stuck as they are right now. If more people wake up to a different mindset and a different way of being in the world, all of this can become more fluid and it can start shifting. I think I'd like that to be my closing message for today, a message of hope.
Thank you. I just second everything you say. It's constellation work, it's personal work. And I see more and more people actually doing that. And even if you think about the evolution, not only of a person or a nation, also like the organizations, you have theories now where you talk about like new work, that even the way we collaborate in organizations starts to evolve. So it's an interesting time that we're living in.
We live in interesting times. There's so many people out there doing really good things, and I would name some of the darker things. I think that's important to do that, and not like be an ostrich sticking our head in the sand. But we just really want to acknowledge there are so many people out there who are like living by their true beliefs and sharing their skills and starting amazing initiatives. And like a really big thank you to them as well. All the people in their own way trying to turn this around.
Thank you to the organizers also, even of this event. It happens every year in July, Truth and Reconciliation, because without first telling the truth, there can be no true reconciliation. That's really how it started. And I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to chat for an entire hour. It is amazing.
Yeah, we did.
How fast the time passed. And thank you to the listeners. You can find our contact details on the website, and for me it's very easy, wiebkehansen.com, And actually, I'm calling in a circle of women, the Circle of Daughters, the first week of August. If you're interested, you'll find more information on my website. And your website is not Imelda Ann, because it's Healer Painter.
Oh no, it's shamanhealerpainter.com.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I have a Substack where I write my not
Right.
always
I love
popular
that.
blogs, but you know, some are very popular, not all. So I have Substack, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I do daily videos here from all the wildlife and the forest witch. I like a whole forest witch feed where every day I do some little scenes from Sweden. I'm an author of books, so you can find it on Amazon and places like that. And also have an online school called Pregnant Egg Teachings, where a lot of material and classes remain available as recordings, so you can still catch up, you know, even if you missed the actual class. So if you type my name in, I think plenty of stuff.
That's a whole page coming.
Lots will come up.
Yeah, you're doing loads of good work in the world, and I'm so happy to know you.
Well, thank you, Wiebke.
Thank you, Imelda. Thank you.
Been a joy.
Speak soon.